Good evening, everyone. My name is Janelle Hart. I'm the Park Services Manager here at the City of Fort Saskatchewan. And I just wanted to welcome you all tonight to the Urban Forest Protection and Enhancement plan that the city is working on in partnership with the 2 Billion Trees federal grant program with the Government of Canada. So we're very lucky to be part of this program. And so it's a 4-phase project that we have started just this past spring. The first phase, we worked with data collection and information gathering. Now we're working on hearing from the public and doing our engagements and seeing how the community values our urban forest. From there, we'll move into the report writing, assessing what we've heard from you, and then the report should be wrapped up spring of 2024. Thank you for being here tonight.
Great, then I will invite Catherine Lennon to lend acknowledgement.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Catherine Lennon. I'm a member of the project team working with Diamond Head Consulting. And I'm really pleased to be able to provide a land acknowledgement tonight, just to share some gratitude and pay respects to the land and the Indigenous peoples who call the area around Fort Saskatchewan home. The city of Fort Saskatchewan is located on Treaty 6 territory and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4. This team and myself are so grateful to visit these traditional lands of many Nehiawak, Nakota Oyadibi, Anishinaabe, and Métis, and today to many other Indigenous peoples who call this land home, including the Inuit. I was really privileged to be able to recently visit Fort Saskatchewan with our team, and we went down to the river valley after a pipe ceremony to tie ceremonial print onto a poplar tree. And even without wandering too deeply into the forest, we were able to explore the paths and the trails that wind next to the North Saskatchewan River, the Kisikatchewan Sipi, and I could really just feel the warmth of the kinship and the beauty of this place. I know this land has a rich history of past, present, and future, and I'm really grateful for the peace and the friendship treaty that allows us to share the space. I'm committed to walking respectfully on this land throughout all of our visits and to just working together with your communities to protect the urban forests. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. We have a great land acknowledgement. Hi, everyone. My name is Camille Lefrancois. I am with the project team as well with Diamond Head Consulting. And I do want to respectfully acknowledge that I am joining you remotely this evening from the unceded traditional lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation in the Vancouver region. Just acknowledging as well that there are very many people here in the virtual room with us. We've got 3 folks from the city team joining us this evening that will be happy to take your questions once we get to the Q&A. And we also have a number of people in our consulting team you've already heard from, as Len, who is joining us from the Modus team, myself, Catherine, and Peyton Meters, who helped us prepare for this evening as well from the Pibiguan Pedaguan team, who is leading our Indigenous engagement. So just a bit of an overview of the presentation that I will be giving you tonight. I'm going to be covering just a bit of project background to give you a sense of why it is that we're doing this work before I give you an overview of our scope of work and timeline, which Janelle was speaking to a little bit earlier. And then I'll give you a sneak peek at some of our preliminary findings about the state of Fort Saskatchewan's urban forest, what we've learned from the data analysis to date. And I'll close with just a couple of themes that we will be looking at in the development of the Urban Forest Protection and Enhancement Plan in our next steps on the project. And as was mentioned, we'll have time for Q&A at the end, so we look forward to your questions at that point. So before we get any further, I always like to start with a little bit of background so that we can start on common terms, meaning what are we talking about when we talk about the urban forest, and why is it that the city wants to develop a plan to help manage it? Well, the urban forest can be defined as being including all trees, plants, and soil that are found across the city. So that would include trees that are growing in your natural forest stands. For example, those beautiful forests you have growing along the Fort Saskatchewan River. It would also include any trees that are growing along your street boulevards, in your yards, and all of the soils and plants that grow along with them. Now, as you'll have heard, because of how the urban forest is distributed across the city, it really is managed by a whole array of people, including yourselves, if you happen to be residents of this city. And as such, when we look at managing the urban forest, it's important for us to recognize the role and support everyone who's taking a part in managing this great resource. Now, with a good understanding of what the urban forest is, the next question is really, why is the city wanting to manage it? For those of you present in the virtual room tonight, you might already know that there is actually a lot of research out there about why the urban forest and trees, soil and plant provide a lot of benefits to us. This slide provides really just a quick overview of some of them. Certainly we know that trees can be really helpful to improve air qualities, provide us with food and medicine. They're of course an important asset or place to create wildlife habitat and support biodiversity. And they do things like sequestering carbon, providing some shade to cool our urban areas, and also beautifying and providing unique character to communities, such as Fort Saskatchewan. So really a lot of reasons why we might be wanting to manage the urban forest. And I do also want to acknowledge, you might notice on the graphic that we have here, a number of free words that are also labeling some of what you see on the slide there, which is just something I wanted to point out as part of our partnership on Indigenous engagement and prospective integration into this project. So tons of reason why the city might want to be protecting and enhancing its urban forest. Now, there are also some challenges, and this slide here, you can see the graphic on the bottom is really speaking particularly to those urban trees. So for example, those trees that we are planting and growing within the streets, along the street boulevards. Trees, unlike human-built assets, actually appreciate in value over time. If I give you the example of human-built asset, for example, a park bench, it will be at its best condition right when it's installed, brand new, and then it will start to kind of degrade over time. Trees are great in that once you plant them, they actually grow and gain in value as they mature. In fact, they provide us with most benefits once they've reached that mature size, and if we can keep them in that great stage. The challenge that we see is that urban trees have a hard life. They tend to have a hard time because of difficult growing conditions and some of the challenges related to the environment we grow them into. And so a lot of trees planted in our urban areas don't last for very long. One of the reasons why the city is looking at developing an urban forest protection and enhancement plan is looking at ways in which we can ensure that those urban trees, when we plant them, not only get a place to be planted on the soil, but really have the opportunity to grow and mature so that they can provide our community with as many benefits as possible. So, project overview. What is this plan going to be about? For folks who haven't read some of the information already available, this plan is really intended to improve the health and resilience of the urban forest. And in order to do that, it will be developing a short, medium, and long-term plan for how the city will manage its urban forest moving forward in order to achieve its strategic objectives. Our project timeline, we've grouped here in two phases, which integrate the four that Janelle was referring to earlier. So we're currently in the first part of that, which is really looking at learning about the urban forest in Fort Saskatchewan. We've been reviewing your policies and practices, how the urban forest is managed. We've been acquiring some data, and we are now in the process of doing some public and Indigenous engagement. So this work has been going on since the spring, and we'll be wrapping up our engagement this summer, so that we can then move into our next phase, which will be to develop the plan based on the data and information we'll have gathered, as well as the feedback that you will have given us, so that we can come up with a good set of recommendations on how the city will approach managing its urban forest moving forward. And we're expecting to wrap up by the spring of next year. So as I mentioned, I wanted to give you a sneak peek of some of the findings that we have achieved to date on the project, so that you can get a sense of what we are starting to learn about the state of Fort Saskatchewan's urban forest. When we talk about the urban forest, a very common metric is tree canopy. And tree canopy is essentially referring to the area of ground that is covered by tree leaves and branches when you look at the ground from above. So for example, if you were looking at Google Maps, you would be able to see the outline that trees are covering of the ground from when you're looking from above. And it's often reported as a percentage coverage, essentially referring to the proportion of land that is covered by tree canopy. It's a great metric because it is comparable, meaning we can look at it over time to see how tree canopy has been changing, how it's distributed, and also compare it with other jurisdictions to get a sense of how we are doing. In this project, we are acquiring tree canopy information using a data called LiDAR for light detection and ranging, which is essentially collected through an airplane that flies above the landscape and allows us to gather a 3D point cloud that allows us to get a full sense of what's found on the ground. We can extract from it building rooftops as well as tree information. And that essentially gives us this tree canopy layer that I was talking about. So the map you see here is giving you a preview of tree canopy in 2019, which is the most recent data we had available to map tree canopy across the city. As you can see on the slide as well, and I do apologize if you're hearing the motorcycle going down the street, canopy cover in Fort Saskatchewan is sitting at 8%. You can see on the map here that, of course, it's not evenly distributed. Some neighborhoods have more canopy than others. And some of those natural areas really stand out with the green canopy that we can see on here. To give you a sense of how 8% canopy compares with some neighboring municipalities, the city of Calgary also has 8% canopy cover. And city of Edmonton, in last available data, was sitting at about 10%, and St. Albert at 13%. Now, as I was mentioning, not all neighborhoods are fully provided with canopy cover. In fact, there's quite a wide range. The most canopied neighborhood in all of Fort Saskatchewan's residential neighborhoods is Old Fort, which sits at a 41% canopy cover, so quite a bit higher than the citywide average. Whereas some of the least canopied neighborhoods like Alston Lands actually sit around 1%. So there's quite a vast discrepancy in how much canopy is growing in those neighborhoods. In some cases, it simply means those neighborhoods are more recent. They have trees, but those trees are really small and don't yet provide a lot of canopies. And in others, it might be suggesting that there are just fewer trees growing. So that's one of the things we will be looking at. One thing I do want to bring up is urban heat. You may be familiar with the term urban heat island. It's referring to this effect that is well studied, showing that essentially paved surfaces and buildings capture heat and essentially lead to much warmer urban centers as compared to their rural surroundings. Tree canopy, as well as pervious ground, meaning soil, grass, agricultural fields, have a really big impact on cooling temperatures, particularly important in urban areas that are subject to those higher temperatures. And we've seen a lot of really challenging effects of some of those heat waves over recent years. What you can notice on this map, and I'm just giving you two examples, is how closely the presence of canopy is related to some of those cooler areas we see in the city. So for example, on that bottom example here, you can really see that the interpretive forest is this big blue dot that we're seeing here, much cooler than its surrounding. And on the top example here, that some of the park areas that are more treed, as well as some of the more treed neighborhoods, really are showing up as less heat or less warm than their surroundings. So that's one of the many things we'll be looking at when we study how canopy is distributed right now and what implications that has for people's ability to enjoy the places they live and go to across the city over, so that we can make some recommendations on how it is managed moving forward. Another thing I wanted to speak to very briefly, and we'll have folks who can talk more about that if you have questions later, is the city tree inventory. So In addition to canopy that's distributed across the city on both public and private land, of course, the city also has a number of trees that it manages on its own lands. And in fact, they track that through a tree inventory for trees that are growing on the streets or that are planted in some of the more landscaped parks. One of the things I wanted to point out, and there's of course a lot more to know about that inventory, is about diversity of species. We know from the data that's available that about 75% of the tree population on those street trees and landscape park trees is dominated by 3 genera. So ash, elm, and spruce make up a really large proportion of the trees that are planted by the city. Now, that's not too surprising given that you are in a challenging climate. Not a ton of trees can grow in the climates, and on top of that, to withstand the harsh conditions that we put those street trees in that have to face things like soil compaction and street salts. So that's definitely one of the challenges in making more diverse urban forests, but at the same time, it also points out to a potential really important vulnerability if pests and diseases were to emerge and threaten those trees that are really making up a really large proportion of what the city is managing right now. And we know that ash and elm both have some challenging pests and diseases they have to contend with. And then finally, I wanted to touch on natural areas. I was mentioning earlier on when talking about the definition of the urban forest that it includes both those trees we plant as well as the trees that are naturally occurring, if you will, in forest stands that we see across the city. We'll be looking at forest stand composition to better understand the health and the composition of those natural areas. And I also wanted to show you a neat little map here that you can see on the screen that we can extract from the LiDAR information I was referencing earlier, which allows us to see some of the tallest trees that we find across the city. So those trees that you can find highlighted in yellow on this map are showing to be those near 24 meters, which is the tallest that we have recorded in the city, which you can see are particularly dense in the areas of Pointe-au-Pin Creek, as well as along the Saskatchewan River and in the Ross Creek area, as well as up in the northern tip of the city. So again, a lot more to be said about natural areas, but just a kind of an interesting little overview from the data that we have been gathering over the last couple of months. And with that, I wanted to leave you with some thoughts about some emerging challenges and opportunities, things that have been identified based on our conversations with staff and the public so far, as well as our review of the current urban forest programs and policies, and the data that we are extracting that I gave you a preview for. Those will be big pieces that we look at and try and tackle when we make recommendations as part of this plan. So of course, growing sites and developments present both opportunities and challenges. We know from visiting as well as from discussions with staff that a lot of areas in the city have really difficult growing conditions for trees. Some of the soils are really difficult to allow those trees to establish and thrive, which makes it very complicated to grow a healthy forest, and will be one of the things that we look at. Development can lead to both removal of trees that were growing before the development took place, as well as planting of new trees. And certainly we will be reviewing some of the policies and procedures that the city already implements to ensure that trees are planted as part of new development taking place in the city to make sure that we are maximizing the opportunities where they exist. Climate change is a big one. We know there already are some impacts that we are facing in terms of extreme events, wildfire, but also different types of impacts related to drought that are really impacting tree health, both in terms of one-time events of varying frequency, as well as just generally speaking, the conditions are changing. So that's something that we keep in mind and will be really a big overarching lens in our look at developing this plan. And pests and diseases is another one, of course, many of them that the city and the residents are already dealing with. You see a picture of black knot here, which is quite common. There are many other ones that are found all across Alberta, the country sometimes, and definitely the region that are creating some challenges in the management. And with climate change, we expect that some of those might become more common or continue to be present over time. I also wanted to bring up program capacity. We know that Fort Saskatchewan is a growing city. You have a great team in place at the city to manage the trees that are found on public land, but certainly as the city grows and as some of those challenges potentially increase with time, we want to make sure that we are allowing the folks who work for the city to provide the services that residents expect. And then finally, we also have heard about some challenges related to both the importance to give access to residents to enjoy and recreate in the urban forest, and some of the challenges that access can create as well in terms of the habitats that this forest is providing for some of the wildlife and biodiversity in the area. And certainly balancing the importance of having access for people to enjoy those beautiful areas and take all the benefits in that I was mentioning earlier, but also allow for those natural areas to thrive will be also one of the considerations. And then finally, I also wanted to note private stewardship. As I mentioned early on, the urban forest also occurs on private land. In fact, quite a bit of the urban forest in Fort Saskatchewan is being stewarded by residents and property owners. We want to recognize that, and we also want to see if there are ways in which the city could further support residents in their care for the urban forest. And then finally, I wanted to highlight some of the themes that you can expect to see in the plan when it comes to be in the coming months. Certainly, as part of facing all the challenges and opportunities I was mentioning, and the many more that will emerge in the work we will be doing over the coming months, we will be focused on finding some actions and recommendations to increase and allow support for planting new trees in the cities, managing the existing trees and forests, protecting those existing city trees, and planting spaces to make sure that we allow those trees to mature, and seeking partnerships both with stakeholders as well as community members to ensure that the urban forest is well taken care of and that everyone caring for it gets the support that they need. So for our next steps, I'll just remind everyone that we are again in the process of doing this public and Indigenous engagement, and we'll be doing so for this next couple of weeks, and then we'll be start compiling this information so that we can move into plan drafting into the fall. And for those of you who have not already, I would strongly encourage you to take our survey or contribute some important urban forest locations online. You can access the website for the project either by scanning the QR code or accessing the hyperlink that you see below. We've also been hosting a number of public events in recent weeks. The webinar tonight is part of that. And in fact, the city will also be hosting a booth at an event this weekend that they can tell you more about in just a minute. So certainly, if you haven't already, or if you have, I strongly encourage you to share information with your neighbors and friends about the survey and the online mapping tool. And also note that the recording of tonight's presentation will also be available for people to watch. And with that, I will thank everyone for their time, and we can get to our Q&A, I believe.
Okay, so we just wanted to open it up to the participants to see if you have any questions. We just wanted to mention again who we have here with us in our panel, so who you can direct your questions to. So we've got Janelle Hart. If you can give a wave from the city team manager of the manager of parks. We've got Matthew with us, who's a city arborist, so you can give him your toughest tree trivia questions. We've got Richard Gagnon on the call, and we've also got Brenna Kelly, who's the project manager from the city, as well as our team of consultants. So yeah, we've got 3 people on the call here, and just wanted to open it up if any of you have any questions for our team here. And you're welcome to unmute yourself and speak your question out loud, or you can put it into the chat. I believe you can put it into the chat box.
Or apologies, Catherine, the Q&A.
Oh, sorry, the Q&A. Okay, Patsy, I see you have a hand up. So would you like to unmute yourself and say your question?
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted now. Am I?
Yes, you are. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm from Fort Edmonton, but I was informed about this because I helped to steward the Fort Saskatchewan Prairie, which I think I saw appeared in green. I'm not sure if I was in the right spot there, but hopefully it's doing something to mitigate the heat effect. Yeah, so the city of Edmonton, where I live, is going through the same planning process, I believe. So I'm interested from that point of view as well. So my question is, how exactly do you plan to manage these trees? And a secondary question, are you going to manage the trees in your natural areas? Because I think the city of Edmonton really confines its management to its what it calls its urban forest canopy, which does not extend to the natural areas. So I'm just wondering what Fort Saskatchewan's approach to that is. Thank you.
I could speak a little bit to how the plan will approach it, and then I'll invite city staff to speak maybe more to how they're managing it currently. But that's a great question. We tend to see kind of two types of assets, if you will, when we think about urban forest asset management on our end. Typically, urban trees, as you were referring, tend to be managed more intensively by cities because, of course, they grow closer to people. They tend to be in areas that need more management. They tend to need to be planted by us to be managed. Whereas natural areas, in some places are more managed than others, but certainly not to the same level. We wouldn't be looking at pruning trees that are naturally growing in a forest in the same way that we would prune a tree that needs the clearance for cars to drive underneath it. Certainly, there are pieces of it that might be relevant for this plan. Risk management is a common one. Or things like invasive species management, but certainly we wouldn't be looking at the same level of management just because the conditions are very different in terms of those assets. And then I might invite city folks to speak further to perhaps the ways in which you manage both types.
Yeah, hi. I can say a few words on that. So like I mentioned, we do prioritize our boulevard trees and more manicured park spaces like Langworthy Park or Legacy Park, rather, Karskad and all those, just because they do see higher use by humans, so they do pose a higher risk to our residents if a tree fails. Whereas in the natural areas, if you clear out too much of the dead branches, you're actually taking away a lot of the native habitat for all the wildlife, and even just nutrients for the soil, because as stuff decomposes, it gives it back to the trees and new and current ones will grow. So we do try to get rid of anything we need to, but it's generally more of a hands-off approach, doing trail clearance and getting rid of any trees that are going to fall on a trail, that kind of thing. Just to mitigate hazards is basically where we stand with natural stands.
Great. Thank you for that question, Patsy. Hopefully that gave you the answer you were looking for. Does anyone else have any questions? Just here to listen. Well, if there are no other questions, I'll just speak slowly in case you think of some. If there are no other questions, we can just let you know about, I think you probably are aware if you found your way to this webinar, but if you want any more information about the project, you can visit the project website, and we can put that into the chat, but it's mysay.fortsask.ca/urbanforest. There are lots of great resources on the website, and there's a survey that's live there, and there's also a map where you can drop some pins on parts of the forest that are important to you or need some work. And if you have any questions or comments about the project, you can contact Brenna Kelly, the project coordinator. I think Aslan is putting all this information in the chat box as well. Brenna's email is also on the website and it's in the chat. So yeah, if you think of any other questions after you go away tonight, you know, please reach out, and we would love for you to fill out the survey, share it around. And yeah, I don't think we have anything else. Do we have anything else to add, project team? Okay, if not, then thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we
I think Matt maybe was gonna make a comment there. I just
oh,
noticed.
sorry,
Matt
go
was
ahead.
unmuting.
Wrapping up too fast.
No worries. I just wanted to thank you guys for putting this together to give us a chance to talk to the community, and for those that did join us, because it's all of our city, and the trees do so much for us. It's good to be making a plan for it. So thank you guys.
Thank you. And you have a beautiful city and beautiful forest. So yeah, it's a real honor to be part of this project from our team's side as well. Okay, then have a great evening, everybody. And this the recording will be available afterwards on the website, I believe, as well. So yeah, you can always watch this again. Okay, have a great evening.
Yep, and if anyone has further questions, feel free to stick around. Otherwise, thank you for joining us.